everybody, and welcome to the Makers of Minnesota podcast, where we talk to cool people doing cool things. One of the cool things that's happening this spring is my daughter, Ellie Johnson, and my husband, Kurt Johnson, are co-authoring a book that's called The Barrens. And they've been working on it for some time, so I'm excited to have them here today to talk a little bit about the process of writing and how they came to the story. Welcome to the program, you guys.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, it's a blast to have you and just to hear a little bit more about your process. So, Kurt, do you want to start and give us sort of the synopsis of the book or the elevator speech, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about two college-age women who decide to take a 450-mile canoe trip through the Barren Lands, which is up in subarctic Canada. One had taken the trip before through a wilderness camp near the BWCA called Widgewagon, but it's called Camp Cowishiwi in the book. 2 weeks in, the experienced paddler, Holly, dies when falling in.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Did you just give away the plot, or is that something you learn early on in the book?
No, you learn part of it early on in the book, but it's kind of it's on the back of.
I was going to say it's on the back jacket. It's not really a spoiler.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but not much. But the inexperienced paddler, Lee, has to continue the downriver trip along the Thalon River with the decomposing body.
Ooh, yikes.
Exactly.
So, Ellie, which character are you in the book?
Well, I know if you were to ask my dad, he would say that I was Holly, the one who dies, which thank you very much.
Dark.
But pretty much if you ask me or anyone else, both characters take elements from my life and my own upbringing. And in some ways, your upbringing, too, is. No? Yeah,
it's certainly a mix of characters in there. You're probably more Lee-ish than you are Holly-ish, but that's...
But it's not linear.
No, it's certainly not linear. So along the way, Lee tells stories about her upbringing, coming of age off the grid in Nebraska, and stories about her life with Holly, kind of both imagined in the future and in the past, how they met. And then when she comes off the trail, she has to confront Holly's parents, who, with the fact that her daughter now is deceased, and they didn't know that she was gay. So there's a little bit of a coming out story.
Oh, so Ellie, can you talk a little bit about, was this based on your coming out story or your telling your parents, being that I'm your mom?
I wouldn't say that the coming out scene is in any way based on my own coming out experience. And in the sense that I didn't even really properly come out, I was kind of outed 3 separate times, in 3 separate ways. But ultimately, I remember it just kind of became apparent to you, and you kept trying to ask me if I was gay, and I kept avoiding you and running away until eventually you texted me and you said, I'm picking you up from school. If you don't let me pick you up from school, I'm locking you out of the house.
Great parenting.
A couple things. One, this is fiction, by the way. This isn't a fictional account. But there is a coming out story, both with Lee and Holly in the book, that were kind of based on being outed at an early age. And that's certainly based on some of the stories I heard from Ellie.
Were you, in hindsight, glad that you were able to come out so early? How old were you?
Well, again, this is kind of has like 2 phases, because I think like socially everyone at like school knew before like my family knew, and that happened around like my freshman year of high school. And then I think by the end of that year, like by the beginning of sophomore year, is when I came out to you guys. And being gay and young is certainly interesting because the microcosm of a high school community is already very bizarre and cultish and interesting. And then you add gay dating and how like limited your pool is, but that also creates like this group of people that you kind of keep dating, and everyone dates, and it gets a little bit incestuous, for lack of a better word.
I was going to say incestuous.
Yeah. I can hear that. Okay, so this is loosely based on your story, Ellie. Talk about your canoe trip and how you ended up on the Thalon River.
So I started going to Camp Widgewagon when I was 7th grade going into 8th grade, I think. So around like 12 or 13. And I started with a week-long trip in the Boundary Waters with a group of like 6 other girls, and progressively the trips kept getting longer in more remote, challenging areas, all canoeing. And then eventually, when I was 16, whitewater came into the mix, and we started doing trips on longer rivers that included whitewater canoeing. And that led me to doing the month and a half, like 50 days in the Barrens of the Arctic, which is what the book is based on. And I did that with me, 2 other girls my age who were 17 and 18 respectively, or both 18 at the time. I was the only one who was 17. And my counselor, who had just graduated college, so she was 22. And I mean, that's not a huge age gap between a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old. And when there's just 4 of you in the most remote, challenging environment, it's like still exists. You really you grow close. There's a deep bond, and it really changes like your perspective on yourself and how you engage with the world when you're just removed from society like that.
And what intrigued me when I first heard it about her going down the Thalon is that they went for 30 days without ever seeing another canoeer or person.
Yeah, and I think it was even longer than that. But yeah, it wasn't until we reached like one of the last 3 lakes before the end of the river that we saw a fisherman and his son who were in a motorboat who stopped by to just say like, "Hey, what's up? Everything good? You guys doing okay? There's a bear on the other side. Cool. Have a good one."
In exactly those terms. So, Kurt, this is your first published book. Tell me about the process of why you picked this story and why this is the first one that you're bringing to market.
After she got off the river, she went to UVM, University of Vermont, and she was taking a course up there in literature, and she had to write a short story. So I had an idea for a short story that I pitched her where 2 girls go in, one dies, and the other one has to take her body out. And, she didn't want to write it, but she said, "You go ahead." So I did. And that little short story turned into a novella that turned into a novel because, it's a simple story in itself, but you have to delve into each of the characters and what they brought to the Thalon, what they learned on the Thalon, and what happened when they got off. So the little short story novella turned into a novel.
How did you know how to write the scenes about the Barrens experience? Were you interviewing Ellie or were you doing research? Because when you read the book, I have never been to the Thalon and I'm really not even a canoeer. And I really felt like I could put myself there, and I was impressed by that.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of late night conversations with Ellie, who was at school and then eventually was home for the summer, and talking about the Thalon River and what it looked like and what it felt like. And I read a couple books, and I had the journey mapped out. But like when you got to Grassy Island, like what did Grassy Island feel like and look like? Was it grass or what? And of course,
the answer is no.
No. And they come across a couple trapper cabins, and what did they look like? Now I saw some pictures too, but asking Ellie what it felt like to be on the river, what it felt like to come across these trapper cabins. We had those in-depth conversations, and it led to conversations because I have to come up with backstory and what's the relationship between these 2 women, and how did they discover their sexuality. So now I had to delve into more personal questions. And these are things that parents really just don't like to ask their kids. They don't want to talk to their kids about sexuality. I certainly didn't. But the novel forced me to do that because I had to be honest about it, and I had to learn those stories. So
yeah, because in one respect, you're a 60-ish-year-old white guy writing about a lesbian story, and there's a sex scene, which as your mom, I was like, "Brr." So I'm assuming you guys talked through that.
Yeah, we talked through that, and there were some times when we just went to a bar, had a couple beers and relaxed, and
a little lubrication.
Yeah, the beer certainly helped. But I mean, I think that at a certain point you were just asking honest questions, and I was trying to, remove myself from
the daughter seat.
Yeah, and just kind of answer honestly and authentically. And you really took that and ran with it. And I think you brought that authenticity into the writing. So I really do feel like, we did a good job of like sitting down and working through that voice and trying to figure out what was authentic to the experience of like my gay youth.
Yeah, and I remember one long conversation where your significant other, Kate, was there at Liquor Lyle's on Hennepin that unfortunately is closed down.
Best bar ever.
I know. That's still one of the most tragic closures that's ever happened.
And we got in depth about the sexuality, lesbian sexuality, and I didn't know any of this stuff, so it was a huge eye opener, and it was a good, honest conversation.
And I think at a certain point, it just becomes like, beyond, I'm not speaking for anyone's personal like experience with their own sexuality, with their development, their upbringing, their relationships. But I think that like, if I can just like sit down and be honest, like, and have that replicated, it becomes more about a story of development, like on a personal level, and like coming of age story, let's say, and less of like a sex scene in so many words.
Did you guys pass the manuscript back and forth, or how did the logistics of writing together work?
Well, I mostly wrote everything by myself in somewhat of a vacuum, and I have to, just because there's a narrative I got to follow, there's scenes I got to write, and I push myself to write 1,000 to 2,000 words every day. So the thing kind of, certainly initial drafts moved along.
You sent on scenes to me to kind of evaluate for accuracy and authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like the second and third time through the book. And then there was some really delicate scenes in there that I don't want to talk about right now. But, I really needed to get Ellie's okay to even publish some of those stories.
Right.
Yeah, he got it.
He did. And as the mom, I was like, oh, wow, did this stuff... People are going to ask you, and they've asked me, like my sister asked, like, did this stuff really happen?
Yeah, a lot of it's not like photorealistic, but in that same way, it was kind of therapy, to some degree, to have to like work through that and reflect on my experience in order to like have it replicated as part of a story, as part of like a character story. It makes me think back and think like, how do these experiences create my story and my character?
Can you talk about the publishing process? Because I think there's a lot of people listening that like, oh, I'd love to like write a book. And tell us about that journey, because that's really, I think, a testament to your personal perseverance.
It's not a news story, and it's incredibly hard to get published. There's
particularly fiction.
And so, a lot of people will write their first book, they put their heart and soul into it and try to get it published, and it just never happens. And I kind of took a longer view. I think I understood that the first novel is not going to get published, so hopefully it will. And maybe not the second one, but maybe the third one. And at some point it becomes a job and become a professional at it. And you start looking for stories and narratives that you think will sell. And I thought this one could sell. But then you have to write, 50 to 100 to 150 query letters out to these 250 or so agents that are mostly in New York that get about 3,000 to 6,000 of these things every year. And you got to break through the clutter and get them to read the first 10 pages, then the first couple chapters, and hopefully they'll call you back and say, can I see the rest of your manuscript? And it's a tough process, and I was extremely lucky.
You read Stephen King's On Writing, and I think that really drove a lot of like you being able to take writing and turn it into your business, your work. He's really good at illustrating how you just need to sit down and write consistently in order to be marketable. He is the captain of writing out tons of
He's very disciplined.
works. Yeah.
He wakes up at the same time every day, and he sits down and he writes. He goes for a walk, and then he comes back in the afternoon and kind of does emails and other things.
It's kind of what I do too.
He guards that writing time, and he's very disciplined about it. Every day he sits there and does it.
It's hard to be a creative to some degree. You kind of have to be a writer. You have to sit down and keep writing, even if you don't feel inspired or
Right.
interested.
Exactly.
And there's so much of it that's craft, right? Just like learning to craft a sentence, learning to craft a story. We talk about character development in doing podcasts and in doing broadcast stories and crafting. We have 10, 12-minute cooking segments and what's the story and what's your beginning, what's your middle, and what's your end. It's hard to imagine doing that day after day alone, kind of in a vacuum.
Yeah. It's fun actually because if you're going back to Stephen King, I do that. I write in the morning and try to get 1,000 or 2,000 words out, and sometimes it's garbage, but I at least get it out, and I got that discipline. But then a lot of the fun part is the afternoon when I take that walk, or I sit in the bathtub late at night and I come up with the scene for the next day. What's the story for the next day? And I really have it in my mind and I jot down some outlines. But that's the fun stuff. The fun stuff is creating stories. And you're right. They all have to have a beginning, middle, and end. And each scene is a story in itself. And something's got to happen. So to me, it's a fun part, but I can see where that's also the difficult part for a lot of people.
It's kind of funny because it's sort of like in your business life, you have like your to-do list, right? And you when you're unwinding, you think about what you want your next day to look like and you set up your day. So you're kind of doing that in the writing space.
Exactly. Yep.
So from the aspects of writing being a business, do you get paid money to publish this book?
Yeah. You don't really go into it as a real business venture to make money. It's just a mindset I have to be disciplined about it. If you do get published, they'll give you, I got $5,000.
Right.
That was, and that's against future sales. So your commissions or your royalties out of the first book sales just go into paying back that $4,000 or $5,000. So, and then you have to do a lot of your own marketing, and that costs money too. So I've yet to actually make a dime, but I'm hoping to make a few.
I hope so too. It's just fun to think about. But I know, people on the podcast know that I've been working on this cookbook, and our experience has been pretty similar, but also really different because you're doing fiction, I'm doing nonfiction. You're working with a New York agent, I'm working with a local Minnesota historical press. But at the end of the day, it's like you put all this energy into this thing. And then, I don't know about you, but do you have imposter syndrome at all? Because I sure do.
I'm a fake it till you make it kind of guy. So
my whole
life has been that way.
I certainly have imposter syndrome because I'm now a debut co-author because my daddy wrote my life story down.
My daddy.
But that's demeaning to the actual writing process and what we went through to produce the book that is hopefully going to be before you May 3rd.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I look back on when I'm proofing something and I think, oh my gosh, should I write this? When did I write this? It just seems so odd. Now you've written a number of books. So now you're trying to are you in the machine of trying to publish more books besides just the Barrens?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote about 3 books before I wrote the Barrens, so I'm going back into that catalog, if you want to call it that. The first book is a fantastic thriller about Las Vegas, based on my time running nightclubs there in the late 80s. So that's in front of my editor right now. We're trying to get a decision on it. And then I've got a book based on your and I travel through the West during COVID times in the RV. So there's a book that I've just finished based on that, a kind of a thriller, funny, humorous thriller. Mm-hmm. So I'm hopefully that will get out there one of these days also.
It's weird too, because of all the books you've written and you talk about, the Las Vegas book and the RV book are kind of dark humor. And yet the Barrens is super thoughtful and very fiction driven with these characters of these 2 women. The books are really different. Is that weird to think about pitching? And because I don't know, a lot of women are popular writers right now, and it's so-and-so writes thrillers and then so-and-so writes romantic comedies. You're kind of jumping genres. Is that a good idea?
No, everybody would tell you it's not a good idea, but I have the luxury of not having to write to make a living, and that's a huge luxury. So I can write what I want to write,
Well, and
which is fun.
If I could speak for you for a sec, I mean, I think that like the 3 books we just talked about really, it really shows your theme is kind of like taking a space that interests you or an experience that interests you and kind of working backwards. So like taking Las Vegas and thinking about what kind of stories would take place in Las Vegas, and, you know, taking an RV through the West, like the back roads of the American West, and turning that into a story. With the Barrens, you kind of took a space that very much intrigued you and went backwards. It's a very contemplative space, so you ended up with a really contemplative story.
That makes sense.
Something that's a little bit, you know, softer and really deals with like your interior character. Like, because you said one of the biggest challenges was creating dialogue in a book where character's alone for most of the time.
Right.
I mean, you could speak to that about like, you know, how do you create thrills out of the more thoughtful environment.
Well, and that comes down to the, you know, the backstories of these 2 women and the imagined future stories of these women, and I kind of do it through a verbal dialogue. It's kind of around the campfire stories.
Well, in that sense, I think your stories might not be like that different from one another, when I think it's just more about you trying to let a story reflect the space that you wanted it to take place in.
Yeah, you just haven't read my novel, The Toes, about a hockey goalie in the 1950s.
No, I haven't, but we've talked about it plenty. And I'd say that your space then is an ice rink in the 1950s. The amount you talk about it, it's certainly like let's say not a place, but a headspace that intrigues you.
Yes.
Ellie, is this something that do you see yourself as a writer? Are you interested in this space down the road?
I mean, I went to school for English, so I have my bachelor's in English. I love writing. It's a big part of my life. I'm trying right now to like write my, you know, debut novel under my own name. By that I mean, you know, just keep writing, as Dad said. And I hope to keep doing that. I'm actually more interested in like movies. I think that's my big pipe dream, is to one day write scripts.
This book does scream kind of movie scenes.
Well, and it just so happens I do have an agent in Hollywood that's pushing the book, and I'm hoping that Bill Pohlad will pick it up, but we'll see.
So if anyone knows Bill, hey, Bill.
We've been told it seems very cinematic, so please.
Yeah, and there's few characters, so it seems like it'd be easy to make, and there's a lot of movies right now in the pipeline because nothing happened during COVID, and now there's like this flood coming through.
Yeah, I don't know how replicating the environment of the Barrens would, like, I don't know where you would film that, where it would be affordable and easy to get to. But I mean, there are the spaces. It's mostly just about trying to find areas that like really replicate that, like moss, permafrost, and lack of trees.
Right.
Like the amount of space is just incredible.
When does the book come out, Kurt?
May 3rd is when it comes out.
And can people pre-order it now?
Yeah, absolutely. Any online bookseller should have it available.
Literally just Google the Barrens book and it will pop up through the publisher's website. Tons of places to pre-order.
Kurt Johnson, Ellie Johnson, and you're having a book signing event. Do you want to invite people to come?
Yeah, we're having kind of a pre-launch event up in Ely where the parts of the novel took place at Paragus. And that's on, I believe, Saturday the 7th at 1:30. And then we're having a larger event at Lush Bar and Theater on May 18th at 7 p.m. And Stephanie will be reading from the book. And I'll have Lori and Julia from the My Talk interviewing Ellie and I. And I'm going to get a little introduction by my mentor, Peter Guy.
And who's Peter Guy?
He's a novelist. He won the Minnesota Book Award a couple of years ago.
How do you know him?
I took a course at the Loft, a year-long writing course at the Loft, and that he taught.
Would you recommend that for people interested in writing?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you want to be a novelist, you want to take a year. It's a good group of people, and he's a great teacher. And I certainly got to the next level in novel writing by taking that course.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been fun to sit and talk with you guys. Good luck on the book. I hope it's a smashing success. We did read it for my book club. We had 10 women read it. And everybody, it's so funny because people are like, oh my gosh, it was so good. Like they're almost surprised kind of, because it's just very personally revealing about.
I mostly just got questions about animals
Well,
and why anyone would even go to a place that has that many mosquitoes.
Because the bugs, yeah, you had to wear like bug gear the whole time.
Yeah, everyone who seems freaked out by it, I say like there's honestly so many bugs that your body adjusts to the toxins within like a week. So that first week, I was a mess, but after that, I wouldn't even get bumps.
Yeah, because you get so much histamine reaction from.
Pretty much.
Yuck. No, thank you. All right, you guys, it's been fun to talk with you on the Makers in Minnesota podcast, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Thanks.